listening to yet another episode of Smash the Bug podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Maxwell. And again, today we have a very special guest. His name is Barny Shergold from Cambridgeshire in the United Kingdom, all the way across the big pond. He has caught my attention through conversations on LinkedIn. He's interacted with a couple of my posts, as well as some really insightful content just with other people's very thoughtful responses, good insights. And I thought, we want to grow. We want to become better developers, more informed. And so who better to have on than Barny? He has a tremendous amount of experience, and I'm looking forward to talking with him here. Before we jump in, as always, please make sure that you have subscribed to our SwiftOtter Inc. YouTube channel, or go to Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Stitcher, or Spotify and look up Smash the Bug there. You will easily find us and this content that we are syndicating for you here very easily. So, without further ado, let us welcome Barny Shergold to the podcast. Welcome, Barny. It is great to have you a part of the show.
Yeah, good afternoon, Joseph. It's afternoon here, by the way.
That's right. It is morning here. And I have to say, I have to compliment you. You have the most beautiful office working space. I see you have double doors, and it's just like, wow, that is a super nice place. I'm sure you enjoy working out of that.
I do, and my wife loves it because she no longer has to listen to me talking on Zoom in the bedroom for hours and hours and hours.
I get that, yes. Well, COVID's changed a lot of things, and it's fun to see those dedicated working spaces popping up. Maybe you could quickly walk me through and our listeners through what would you say you're most technically proficient at? I know you've done a lot of solutions architecture in the past. And maybe kind of give me us a brief overview as far as from your perspective, because I know that seems to vary, like what a solution architect does. But what is it that you feel like the most comfortable at?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it's I've been a software developer and designer for about over 30 years, and a lot of that has been done without proper frameworks. It's been done with a various number of languages, ranging from, believe it or not, I started coding in Fortran 77.
Ow.
Moving on to moving on to C, moving on to and then PHP, and then finally I've programmed Java and some really weird languages out there. But then I found Magento in kind of around about 2010. I got offered a job by an agency that said, "Hey, there's this new eCommerce platform come out. It's called Magento. No one's ever heard of it, and we need to get this old Interspire website. You interested in a job and trying to work this out?" And I went, "Yay!" And this was in the days when there was no documentation and nothing nice available like DevDocs and things like that.
Right.
So I've got a big background of trying to figure out what legacy systems look like, how they've been architected, and gone, oh dear, that's not very good, is it? So over the years, I've gained a lot of knowledge of actually designing software and actually then coding it. And probably around about 3 years ago, I decided, okay, we've got all these young people, and I call young people in their 20s, coming up. I'm more interested now in sitting with the clients and actually figuring out the big stuff and actually making sure that we get the scoping and the design and the outline of the solution done correctly before the coders actually start coding.
Right.
Because what people forget is that they always think about software having bugs, smash the bug, as in there's a problem with the code. But if you misinterpret a task or a requirement from your client, and you tell the developer build this, and they interpret what you're doing, they could write the most beautifully architected, wonderfully laid out, all those injections and beautiful API links, works perfectly, but doesn't do the job. Your code has bugs. Your code has a massive bug in that it doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do. It works how the developer expected it to do, but not how the client does. So this is where I like that smash the bug. The best way of actually solving a bug is by not letting it in the code in the first place.
That's for sure. Absolutely.
So this is kind of where I've been going for the last sort of 3-4 years. I'm quite passionate about, whilst we have all this lovely stuff like agile and things like that, I think it's okay to develop in an agile way. But if you really want to make sure that you're not going to cause all these problems down the line, you need to actually scope things out properly and really get in with the client. Many years ago, one small thing, numbers, many years ago, when I was writing C, there was a guy going around and he said, if you've got a bug that would take you an hour to fix when you're talking to the client, if you let it get all the way down and all the way down to the coding testing area, no, right down the bottom, it'll take you 1,000 hours to fix. And I've seen metrics now done with, our e-commerce platforms, which are obviously give our developers a lot better frameworks. They don't have to write every line of code from scratch.
That's right.
And it's still kind of, the numbers I've seen, still 80-1. So this is why we need to smash that bug before it even gets near the code.
Yes, I totally agree. I absolutely agree. And what I hear from you is doing a project right involves properly speccing it out, having people who are a good liaison between the usually less technical merchant and the highly technical developer. You have to have somebody to interact there to be able to spec out the project, to scope it out. And I think the challenge for many of us developers is we love slinging code. We love writing code, and holding back on that to make sure that the project has been properly designed, a proper target, a proper vision is in place for what this is going to look like, and again, making sure that it meets requirements. I recently, a project we were working on, the merchant was incredibly frustrated with the previous developers because they said what they wanted, and the developers went and built something that they maybe thought was in line with what this merchant wanted, and there was no connection there. I mean, it was like totally separate, and it was over and over and over again. And so having that capability to interact, I think, is an incredibly valuable skill, and you've definitely mastered it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I've moved on. Is like I've had a lot of time, having to communicate directly to the business people. I think the biggest chunk of my working life, if you go back into my CV, is back in the 90s. I worked for a company called Pipex, which was born out of UUNet, which was MCI WorldCom, which you guys know about. And we were one of the first ISPs. We were quite a small company, so the business. I was the tech guy, and we had the MD. He spoke business. I had to figure out how to talk to him on a daily basis, going backwards and forwards. And you learn those lessons. And I do think that, like you say, if you want to be really good developer, you don't have to come up. But if you want to design the systems, and you need to come up off the parapet, you need to be able to sit in front of, feel comfortable in sitting in front of people that are not technical. And talking in their language, and to be honest, you've got to understand their language, because they're going to talk business back to you. They're going to have jargon as well, and I've noticed this one as well. Business people have jargon, particularly salespeople and marketing. They come out with all these wonderful words like synergy and paradigm, and you go, what are you talking about?
That's right.
And somehow you're going to try and live in both camps, and I think, I hate to say this, I think you do need to be you need to have a few years under your belt. Experience to do that, and it's kind of the reason why I'm moving into that, because I hate to say this, I was coding professionally before. An awful lot of people probably listening to this podcast were even born, but I'm not worried about that. It's good. We're all big one big happy family these days, and that's really nice. That's
right. On Link, like I mentioned earlier when I was introducing you, you and I had a conversation on LinkedIn, and I really appreciate it. I love it when the community engages with the things I put out. And that was about a post that I put out about MySQL and handling null values, and specifically in relation to the fact that Magento does allow in a lot of columns. I say a lot, at least a number of columns, for example, like on the sales order table, null value, as well as all the rest of the integer spectrum. So, and it was a warning to make sure that, you remember, if you need to view null as 0, you have to keep this in mind. And you had a really good point. It's a huge pitfall to use null on more or less an integer based column. Maybe you can explain a little bit more of that in your thinking there.
Well, if you go back into the mists of time, and we seem to have forgotten it, is not null literally means not defined.
That's right.
It's not got a state. Now, it doesn't mean zero. So if you are looking at an integer value or a decimal value on a database, or even a variable, it's not the same as zero.
That's right.
And that can actually be quite useful, because you can actually, if you know that there are certain columns in a database that allow not, it does mean that you can actually determine, I know this is zero, but is it zero because it's been set, or it's just default? So if it's null, this value has never been set. Although I think that a lot of the time I always feel that if you are going to use financial numbers in a database, ideally, you should always give them a default. Because if you start going back to if you speak to an accountant won't have the idea of, well, okay, I didn't define what that value was on.
That's right.
Because that's zero.
Yes.
You can't have not defined in money. I mean, you've either got some, or you've got none, or I owe you some. You've got a negative balance. So it's either one or the other. And I think that's where possibly sometimes people get tripped up with, as you say, checking values or searching, is that if you're looking for zero, you're not going to get null.
That's right.
So the developer says, I want to find all records where the discount for this order was zero. If they write a particular, depending on how they do it, they might not get all the actual records back, because if the discount was set, it wasn't actually set, it might still show as null. And therefore, you said in your post, and we discussed it, they need a slightly more complicated request.
Yes.
I think that's where sometimes they might not realise that that's happened, because then it becomes ambiguous.
Well, and I think PHP has also done a bit of a disservice there too, right? Because with a non-strict, because it kind of does treat both of zero and null the same. If you're using a non-strict comparison, which that's kind of a code smell anymore, to not use strict comparisons, I think that's kind of what I've seen trip people up. And I love what you said about the especially financials. We should never have a null value, because a null means $0 or £0, whatever. Like it's not been set yet, meaning it's empty. And so we should not, at least what I take from this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we should not rely on, for example, tax invoice to see whether or not this order has been invoiced or not. We should rely on some other check to make sure that this order has not been invoiced, as opposed to a strict null value in that column. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to keep the null values for a specific reason, like I didn't set a discount. So in other words, there's a difference between I gave you a 0% discount, right, and not giving you a discount at all. So you could say this customer had received a zero, because of calculations, a £0 discount. So you record zero in the column. And you can, as long as you accept that they are different, then, and you know that they're different, and you know the structure of the database, then we can code to it. I think one of the issues I sometimes wonder is, if you are making these comparisons, are you getting not lazy, but because we have this lovely framework that Magento gives us, and we have now moved away from the fact that we don't write SQL directly into Magento encoding. We actually move away from that, because we don't want to know what the underlying database is, and also, more importantly, we can protect against hacking and SQL injections and all sorts.
Yes, exactly.
Like Bobby Drop Tables, that cartoon that we've all seen recently. And what I wonder there is, because the developers no longer have to think too much about the structure of the database and what the fields are, is that we've driven a little bit of a wedge of knowledge between the developer and the actual underlying database. Actually looking at the SQL database.
That's right.
And I'm wondering whether this is a truism. In other words, because the developers go, I don't need to know what the underlying the tables. Here are my models that somebody's written for me, or that have been created by Magento, and this is how I'm going to write my my collections and things like that. And then you kind of lose that connection to the, shall we say, the grassroots of the database.
That's right.
And
yes.
I'm old school. If I'm going to talk to a database, I want to go and fiddle around and look at the database structure, see what's available on all the tables, and understand the actual database at the really bottom level. You can help avoid the problem you talked about, because you say, hang on, if I do this, because I know the table structure is structured like this, blah, blah, blah. And also, if you actually really get down and dirty to the actual database again in the data, you can sometimes spot things going, I need to make that connection between this order and that there, and I need to get from this point to this point.
That's right.
And create this. So I've used to, when I was doing the coding where I build the SQL statement in my head or on paper, make it work, and then translate it into the Magento using the framework language rather than the other way around.
I love that.
That's what it's going to be. I can test it against a test database. Yes, I am getting the right data. And I've had that one before where, I'm expecting so many records to come back and they're not. Why not?
That's right.
Okay, I've got that little quirky thing here. And this is where, the quirky thing about, not null, no test for that.
Yes.
And then translate that SQL statement into the real language, right? Into Magento.
I totally agree, and that's worked for me so many times. And I feel like my comfort in let me just put it this way. I strongly it's been something I pushed for a while. Probably could do more of it, but I am such a very strong believer in resource models in Magento. So many people just go to a collection, they'll load their product repository and just try to iterate through it or filter it out and and rely much heavier on PHP. Now, there's a time we need to do that. We could write really bad queries, but it seems like at least 4 times out of 5, it's better. Operations are done better on the MySQL side than on PHP. And being thoughtful and I would say just use the word intentional, because I don't know. I wonder if that's also where some of our mistakes can come in, is that we rely too much on past experience, off of memory, off of habit, as opposed to saying, what is the right solution for this? Trying new things, exactly like what you were saying there. Let's write the SQL first and then port it back into Magento's ORM, if we can loosely call it that. And the other
reason for doing sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, that's good.
The other reason for doing that is that one of the biggest, but you mentioned before we came on air about performance issues. One of the biggest when I go back to databases, one of the biggest performance issues is where somebody links tables together to get, they want one big collection or one big thing, and they wonder why the thing's slowing down, and it's because they haven't got the right indexes and foreign keys, etc.,
That's right.
on the database tables. Now, if you actually write pure SQL, you can then test it. If it seems a bit slow, you can get your SQL system to analyze the, I can't remember what exact command is these days.
Explain.
Explain. That's the one. Explain it, and it'll tell you what it's doing. And
that's
sometimes
right.
You'll be amazed. My goodness me, because I've done this, I've actually got a full table scan in here.
That's right. It's scanning a million rows here to get this one thing.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. So what I need to do is, and that's the other thing is that I wonder how many Magento developers with existing table structures have actually gone back and added their own indexes to even core tables. Obviously, you want to add them programmatically normally, but you can obviously add them. How many developers have actually gone? Blimey, if I put this special index on the order table, or I do it over here, I can massively speed up my query because I've understood the explain. I just wonder how many people do that. Hopefully everybody's going at the end when they're listening to this. I do. We're all doing it.
Well,
which is great to hear.
To be really frank, I don't, and so that that's a good challenge to me, because, and then one of the tricks I always tell people as far as developers, make sure if you have a select and you go call fetch one, fetch call, fetch pairs, whatever. You can cast that select to a string and you get your select, and you just drop that in your SQL editor, drop a explain at the front of that, and you get to see exactly what's going on. And optimizing it past that is often fairly easy. Is not always. And I guess one other thing just to throw out there is sometimes a query is not the best solution. But there are creative aspects or creative mechanisms you can use at that point, even if a query is not the best solution. Likely PHP is even a worse solution at that point.
Yeah. And also, if you, I think with Magento, sometimes I've come across where you've got a multi-step process where I'm going to go and get some data at this point of the customer journey, and I need to use it again at the end of the journey.
Right.
And what I've seen is that occasionally you see the code and you go, well, okay, this code-wise is fine. They go and do the query at the beginning, and then they do the same query at the end. And you're going, well, why don't you just store that data? You've already got it. Store that data in the cache, or session data, or even depending what either Magento cache, or lots of people can use it, or the customer session data. Don't be afraid to store data in a customer session data, because you can hold on to stuff that way. Magento cache is brilliant for that sort of thing. I mean, it's amazing how often you can share data rather than keep going and getting it. And don't be afraid to use the database. That's the nice thing about Magento is there's lots of different levels of storing data now. You don't have to, like you said, if it's temporary transient data, but you really want to hold on to it, you don't have to store it in the database. Also have a look. Do you really need this data? Does this data really need to be stored? Is there a better way of structuring this data? I mean, rather than shoving huge thousands and thousands of records on an order table, why not create a subtable? If you're only storing information for a small subset of orders, don't store that value against every single order.
Exactly, and I think some of it also comes back to even like Magento 1 habits being brought over into Magento 2. For example, like you mentioned, the database tables, and I think, frankly, I see it somewhat as a code smell anymore to add columns, and correct me if you see differently, but to add any columns to the sales order table, because the question is, how are we going to expose that? If we add a new column to the order table, it would be basically impossible to make that appear or to expose that via the API so that our ERP can access this. So at that point, we have to use extension attributes. And with extension attributes, okay, that makes it easy to see. But then why are we storing it on the order table? Why not just create a separate table we could add however many columns we want in there, make it very easily accessible via an extension attribute. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I've become a bit of a fan over the last couple of years of the idea of the extension attributes. They're a little bit more tricky to program. You've got to set them right. But I think one of the plus points though is that what's happening is that you are actually, by using extension attributes, you are not polluting, as it were, the core tables that Magento gives to you. That means that if you ever actually wanted to uninstall a module, which people keep talking about, I want to be able to take this module out. I want to be able to then remove all the data associated with that module,
right?
And away we go. If you've created columns on a table, you can delete them. But not always a good idea, because if you delete a column off a table and there are a million records in that table, but you've only ever stored values against, a dozen records, you're going to restructure it. Well, actually, what you can do is you can just rip out you can find all the extension attributes and lose them, or you could actually do what you just said, if you did it on a separate table. But the thing I've found is if you have too many tables, the system becomes a bit of a behemoth, and then everybody's sort of staring at thousands of tables, wondering how they all link together in the first place. and they grow. You'd be surprised.
Oh yeah, they do.
Going back to that system I said with Pipex, I actually built the billing systems over 10 years, and by the time we decided to retire the original platform, which was a forerunner of Axapta AX, there were over 600 custom tables in there, and that's 10 years. So I think it's a case of use the tools that you've got in the best way, but sit down and think about what is the best way. And that's the other thing I think you need to think about is when you're planning out what techniques you're going to use is it's great we're writing this code and building this database and doing these queries today, but where might this be used in 6 months, a year, 2 years,
10 years.
10 years. Well, why not? Just because it's old, it doesn't mean to say you need to throw it away.
That's right.
And I'm still here.
Well, even at the 10-year mark, I'll be curious to see 10 years, hopefully from this conversation, we'll be able to look back at this conversation and say, wow, we're going to see a lot of history then. But there is a point, 10-year-old code is vetted code. It works. It's going to be pretty solid after 10 years of usage of bug fixes. And no matter what you go to after 10 years, there's going to be a lot to reverse engineer, to rebuild. Yeah. And to some extent, that could be good. There could be archaic stuff in the system that's no longer necessary. But it is a system that does work. And, that's the trade-off I think every company has to make when they're deciding, okay, are we going to switch up to a new platform? Okay, we have to remember that there is a whole bunch of architectures that our process is already built on. And we're going to have to be willing to invest the money to find those pieces that are necessary, as well as build them out properly in the new system, and be willing to work through the bugs that come.
I think also going back to the smash the bug bit, because you may be writing code that will last years, hopefully, fingers crossed. Yeah. Whilst Magento and modern day PHP framework and all that stuff, we can read code and we can pretty much understand what this code is probably doing at a method level or class level. We have nice ways of writing methods that this method, you can read a method name and know what it does.
That's right.
And you can see, you should be able to see what a variable and what does this variable do. Years ago, people wrote functions like A, and I have a variable.
I raised my hand there. Yeah.
Okay. Right, but the thing is though, I can read. I've done this before. I can read code and I can go right. Okay, I can see what this code is actually doing, but why is it here? Where does it actually integrate? What's it for? Why did you write this code in the first place? And I'd encourage developers that even if you are, you believe that your code is self-commenting, put some comments in that explains what the code was for. Because if you've got a developer who comes back in 2 years and goes, yeah, okay, they did this, but why did they do it? If I take it out, is it going to break something? I'd like to understand what the purpose of this was in the big picture.
I love that. Very well.
This class. I can see this class, and I can know. I liken it to going back to our marketing people. How many people have sat there and listened to sorry, how many marketing people might be listening to this. But marketing person stands there and goes, we've got to do this paradigm shift and the synergy, this, and you go, well, I actually understood every single word you just said. I didn't understand the sentence.
That's right.
And the same thing goes with code. I understand what every line of this code is doing, right? What it's got, but what I don't understand what the whole thing is doing.
That's right.
And so on.
Very well.
That's what I would say. Another way of smash the bug.
That's right.
Remember, some poor person's coming back in 6 to 12 months, and that person might be you.
Oh boy, have I been there and done that. Absolutely. I couldn't agree anymore. That's good. Really good information, really good conversations, and we didn't even get to the first question. So that says we got a lot more to talk about. Very good.
I thought we weren't going to have much to talk about.
Well, it turns out I knew once we got going we're going to have some great stuff. And this was really, really good. I every developer who listens to this is going to have solid takeaways from this, which is what my goal is every single conversation. So Very good. Well, Barney, thank you for coming on this episode. I appreciate it. Appreciate you taking your time. I wish you the very best in your adventures, your as you work with the merchants, as you build solutions, architect solutions. Thank you again. Truly, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me, Joseph, and you need to keep up the good work as well.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure having you here. Wow, what a really good podcast that was. I am super grateful for Barney coming on, sharing his experience, clearly 30 years of experience. I don't know if you were able to make out the numbers on his shirt, but a lot of really solid experience. And I definitely learned some stuff, took away some information from this podcast myself. I want to become a better developer, and I know every one of you listening to this will also want to become a better developer. And look forward to segment number 2 of our conversation here with Barney, because we definitely have to have him back to finish out again. Like, I got my notes here. We didn't even get through half the questions. So I am super excited about this, and thank you for listening to Smash the Bug.